Okay, now I'm going to go through the stages with you. We're going to go through only the first 8 stages because of time limits, but those present the foundations. After the first 8 stages, the others are elaborations. They're actually, the other stages represent increased sophistication, increased complexity of what we've already been developing in the first 8 stages. So this will give you a good idea of where to start. By the way, when we evaluate people on the autism spectrum, regardless of their language or intelligence, we find that it is extremely rare for any individual on the spectrum to have mastered more than stage 2, and very likely that there has not been mastery even in stage 1. Okay. So let's begin with stage 1. Remember, the stages are not related to age or how much language you have or how high your IQ is. They're totally different abilities. Right? Think about the star football quarterback who can't read a word. You would never assume that just because he can throw a wonderful pass, it means he can read at an advanced level. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that those two intelligences or abilities are completely separate. The same is true of what may be measured in an IQ test or a language test and what may be seen in the RDA. Okay, so again, be prepared for that discrepancy. Now, in stage 1, we're building the foundations for referencing, which means we want to build in the desire, the motivation for the person to engage in facial gazing. We want this to become automatic. We want them to be checking out other people's faces on an ongoing basis and having some intrinsic motivation or payoff to do that. And having some intrinsic motivation or payoff to do that. We want that to become automatic. And in fact, in stage 1, we want the person to become addicted to sharing facial expressions. That's what we find with young children. And that's what we find when you see a 6-month-old or an 8-month-old in church or in a restaurant. You can't take your eyes off them and they can't take their eyes off you. There's really a mutual addiction to facial gazing. Well, what is that about? One of the things that young children learn quite early is that when they gaze at another person's face and they see the emotions, they experience the emotions of the other person, it amplifies their own emotional state. So if they're sort of a little bit happy and they look at someone who is just joyful and gleeful, that will intensify their own joy. It's called emotional contagion. We also know when we're mildly or moderately distressed, we can look at the face of someone we trust, and their facial expressions and sounds and voice can serve to soothe us, to decrease our distress. So those two factors, amplified excitement and soothing, become conditioned in the neurotypical baby. They don't necessarily become conditioned in children on the autism spectrum. Right? So the first step is to create that addiction. Now, where we're going to do that, where that excitement is highest, is at moments of anticipation. What we find is that emotion sharing at the moment right before the climax of an activity or right before the ending of an activity is the most neurologically, neurochemically powerful moment of any activity we share. So, for example, if we're walking together and we're about to fall onto a stack of beanbag chairs, something that we might do in our evaluation, you might think that the most powerful moment would be the time that we fell together and they were rolling around in the beanbag chairs. But actually, if we look at the neurological pattern, we see that the most heightened level of excitement occurs right at the moment before we fall, the moment where we're anticipating the climax or the result. Think about that in your own lives. How many times have you worked so hard to achieve something, put in so much effort, and you're excited, you're about to reach that place, and then there's a bit of a letdown when you actually get it, right? And it's not because it was the wrong thing or you didn't want it. It's because on a neurochemical level, the height of your excitement came right before you got it, when you were anticipating it, thinking about what was about to happen. That moment of productive uncertainty is what we're trying to reach. So in stage 1, we emphasize a lot of shared activities where you, as the guide, if you're a parent, are going to insert pauses, hesitations, and strategic moments where you can amplify the excitement through shared gazing. And how will you know if you're successful? Well, one important way you'll know is if you minimize or dampen down your expressiveness during those moments, will your partner notice? Will the child be aware that something's missing? Will they even care? That's one of the critical ways that we test to see if objectives in stage 1 have been mastered.